Oh, okay, we are live. Good. Okay, welcome to AM Comics and Coffee with Brett, Matt, and well, Tank is late, but he'll be here. Here, but that's to be expected. It's like, Matt, do we have any idea what time it is in South Africa right now?
Yeah, I believe it's dinner time for them.
Yeah, he'll be along.
Yep.
But yeah, we've got a guest with us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Preston.
And he is the creator of Pocket Jack Comics.
Yes, yeah, that was something I started about 2 or 3 years ago because I was a screenwriter in Los Angeles, and I become really there's something about screenwriting which I guess makes sense if you do it, but not if you're just kind of don't think about it too much. But the problem with screenwriting is after you put all this work into creating a piece of art, you can't really sell it to anyone except a major studio, and they don't buy very many. So I didn't want it to sit on my shelf, so I just decided I'd make a comic book out of it. And
yeah, Matt and I have kind of joked with each other that to work in Hollywood, it's kind of a prerequisite for you to be a sellout.
Yeah, exactly. So, and so I went back to Dallas, where I'm from, and the thing about Los Angeles is, when you're out here, you just like hate the city, and you hate like how industry people are and how disingenuous all the interactions are. But when you go back to your hometown, and Dallas is a nice metropolitan area, but people are just like, so you've been in Los Angeles, and they just automatically assume like you know how to make a movie. So
No. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Nope.
And it's I like to tell people because being from Dallas when I was growing up, just to show you how much TV dominates everything. There was a hit show named Dallas, and when I would visit people from other areas, they just believed that people in Dallas had ranches and that we rode horses and stuff, and that was just a typical perception.
Yeah, so. For the record, my dad's family is all from my dad's side of the family. They're all from Texas. They're from from Amarillo.
Sure.
That's what they're thinking of when they're thinking of all the ranches. They're thinking of Amarillo.
Exactly. Yeah. And but it's kind of weird the way media influences perception so much. And Dallas and Los Angeles being two heavily areas where there's a heavy amount of influence. In Dallas, people assume cowboy hat and horse. Los Angeles, people assume you just know how to make a movie. It's like you're walking down the street and there's a film set. Although, having lived in Venice Beach, that was kind of pretty common. When I'd go to boxing in the morning, I'd have to walk by a film set or something that was spontaneously sprung up.
Yeah. So I mean, like, yeah. So your idea sort of spun out enough from a screenplay you had that you couldn't sell, and you say it was a good idea you didn't want to go to waste.
Right. And now I'm hanging out with industry people. And they're looking at what I'm doing and they're like, that's the right way to do it. And they talk about people who are like screenwriters who had an idea that they wrote a screenplay for, and they got an agent and they pitched it to all the major studios and they all said no, and then they turned it into a novel or they turned it into a comic book, and then a bidding war broke out for the story. So for whatever reason, Hollywood is like resistant to ideas that aren't commercially tested, and a comic book is a test of an idea. So here I am.
Well, yeah, like like I said, to work, if you're going to work in Hollywood, it's kind of a prerequisite that you're a sellout. Like they just do not have room for real originals unless you've got the right connections.
Exactly. And the other thing I found, and this is in dealing with people, because I've also make movies, and dealing with people who are potentially going to want to work with me. And, like I'll be talking with a guy who maybe wants to be director of photography, and I'll send him a script, and then we'll be talking about it. And I realize like they just really gave the script kind of like a cursory look over. And when I'm, I wrote the thing. So I'm thinking like, oh, well, what did you think about this scene? And like that scene will not register with them necessarily because, their involvement in your story was kind of small. Like they were just scanning through it in order to try and get the job. But comic books have this wonderful ability to take your story and graphically present it in a way that's far more engaging than just, words on a page. And I love that.
All right, so Preston, if you don't mind telling us, so what exactly is the premise behind your book?
See, well, the newest one I'm doing right now is Guinevere and the Divinity Factory, which combines elements of Harry Potter and The Great Gatsby. So that's kind of LA speak. Whenever we're describing a story, we like to give you what they call the comps or comparable stories.
Yeah,
So
Matt and we've done that too. Like I describe, we've done that without even knowing what that was. Well,
Right.
Matt knows what that is because he's such a devout follower of J. Michael Straczynski.
Right.
But yeah, what I've described my book, Changeling, as the way I pitch it to people is if you grew up watching stuff like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Bleach or Sailor Moon, this is for you.
Right.
Like, and Matt, like with McKinnon Chronicles,
It's kind of like in a way, the elements of Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan as a more space age Horatio Hornblower.
Neat.
Yep.
So one of the things that I do out here, and particularly working comic shows, is I get used to pitching my own material. So for me, it's pretty polished, and comps help in that way. You know, like if I'm sitting here going, okay, so we've got a woman and she can do magic a little bit, but she needs to learn more magic, so she's got to find some guy to study under. That takes me a while to describe. But if I'm like, it's like Harry Potter, people are like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, at least you guys you pretty much have to speak in shorthand.
Right, exactly. And in part, it's just very efficient that way. Although it does lead sometimes to confusion because then people are like, "Well, wait a minute. Did J.K. Rowling say it's okay for you to make this story?" I'm like, I don't need her permission because it's not literally Harry Potter. It's just figuratively. I mean, and really, I mean, what is it that Harry Potter is unique about? We've always had wizards casting spells. If anything, Harry Potter is Merlin the Magician and British boarding school.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the most unique thing about Harry Potter is that it's just we get a bunch of wizard kids and they have a school for themselves.
Right. Right. So and that was kind of J.K. Rowling's unique contribution to the magic genre, was to take wizards and put them in a British boarding school environment. And okay, cool. And my story doesn't do that. I'm instead taking wizards and I'm putting them in kind of this Gatsby-esque world. And that's if you look at the pitch video. Have you guys seen the pitch video on it yet?
No, because dude, this was all kind of thrown together last minute because I had literally woken up like half an hour before you.
Okay. Well, I put a lot of work into it. I would encourage you guys to check it out. It's 80 seconds. It's Guinevere and the Divinity Factory. It's up on both Indiegogo and Kickstarter. My Indiegogo campaign so far has no love whatsoever, but on Kickstarter I'm tearing it up. So I'm not sure why I'm getting such different reactions on those two platforms. But
I mean, it's not like there's gatekeeping.
It could be. It certainly could be.
Well, which platform did you use the most?
Kickstarter, definitely. I mean, the reason I put it up on Indiegogo this time around was because, in talking with people who are comic fans, it seemed like that's where they were getting their comics from, or or looking for projects to back was on Indiegogo. So I'm like, all right, well, if that's the preferred platform, let me throw it up on there. But so far, no love. Oh well.
Well, it's possibly because you have a following on Kickstarter now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and but like I wanted to get IndieCron involved, and so I sent them a link to my Kickstarter, and they're like, oh well. We're not set up to track Kickstarter projects. We're set up to track Indiegogo projects. I'm like, hold on. So threw it over on Indiegogo. So there it is on both platforms for whoever's interested. But I mean, I've been kind of gearing my crowd off my email list and stuff towards Kickstarter because it's what I've used in the past. It's how they know me. And we're doing great over there. It hasn't even been 24 hours and we've already hit 25 or over 25% of our funding. So.
Jeez.
So that's going well. And one of the things that was unique about it this time, I haven't even seen any of the big studios do this, but I made both a comic book and a music video. So, yeah. So if you, for instance, back there's a $28 level on the Kickstarter, and there's a comparable reward level over on Indiegogo. You get issue 1 in the regular cover, issue 1 in the variant cover. The artwork is gorgeous, by the way. I'd love to show you guys. And then you also get a download to a music video, which features the woman whose likeness I used for the character.
Can we assume? Whoa! Run that back for a sec. Did he say likeness? Matt, do you realize what this means?
What does it mean?
That Brian did not come up with this first.
Oh, no. I don't think anyone's ever said that.
Yeah, our friend, our friend Brian Ball. He's one of the creators of Rags, and I mean, if you follow them at all, you'd know that they used the likeness of Liz Finnegan for their main character, Regina.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I did it because, all right, and going back to my very first comic book show, I didn't have a comic yet. I just had an ash can. And this was for White Lily, the comic I've been, doing for a couple of years, which is about the 2 deadliest female fighter pilots in history. We're going to be kickstarting issue 3, also on Indiegogo, probably like March or April. But at the very first show I did, it was an Austin Comic Con, or Wizard World Austin, I should say, back in like 16. I want to say, or maybe even the tail end of 15. But I was looking for some cosplay models to dress up as the 2 main characters. So I posted an ad, and this woman named Juliet Kita was a very attractive model out of the Austin area, and she responded. And she worked my booth that show, and we kind of started a professional relationship. And since then she's wanted to move out to LA, which is where I was, and so. I stayed in touch with her and helped her get situated. And I'm friends with her husband, and sometimes she would get questions about the industry, and she, we kind of developed a bit of a friendship. And back then I noticed when she was working the booth, how attractive she was. But not only just like I found her attractive, but like other people would stop and they'd look, and like how attention getting she was. And so I'm like, I think I would want to make you, kind of one of the focus of a comic book. I think you're worthy of that. And she, was thrilled. And so this is by far the biggest exposure I want to say she's gotten in the comic world. And when I was interviewing her, she would I always wanted to be a comic book hero, and I got her to talk about she'd visualize this idea for a character called Crimson Fury, because she's a redhead. And well, it was cool. I'm kind of making a dream come true in that. But because she's out here in LA and she's just the likeness of my character, I'm like, why don't I take you and put you in a music video? So it's kind of cool in that I'm using her both the likeness for the character, but she's also the actress who is portraying her in my music video. And that was neat.
Can we assume that this music video is a completely original song too?
No. This was from Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. It's the song called Why Me. Again, we're going with kind of a Gatsby-esque element. So I was looking for something that was ragtime. And Big Bad Voodoo Daddy is swing, but I also realized most people can't tell the difference between ragtime and swing. So I sent them a message, and I said, hey, I want to make a music video. And we negotiated a rate. And so Big Bad Voodoo Daddy will be providing the soundtrack for this music video.
Matt says he'll be right back. But yeah, getting back to them, was like, is it this? I'm going to assume, what is this, like a local band out in Dallas?
Big Bad Voodoo Daddy?
Yeah.
They played the Super Bowl back in the aughts.
Really?
Yeah. If you want me, I can hold on. Allow me to use the magic of Google. Let's see.
Wow. Dude, I would have been impressed if you just gotten some local band out of Dallas. That's you got an act that actually played the fucking Super Bowl?
Absolutely. Let's see. 1998 is when this article was out. So yeah, so they played the Super Bowl back in. All right, so it wasn't the aughts. It was the 90s. But yeah, absolutely.
Still, I'm not sure if that means anything, because I had a teacher back in high school who said Mike Whitaker says they are a well-known quote-unquote swing band.
Exactly. Yes, they are. They're a well-known swing band.
What I was going to get at those, I had a teacher back in high school who said that when you played the Super Bowl, that means your career is over. Although, I mean, like, take birth because like we had the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Bruno Mars play the Super Bowl, so their careers aren't exactly over.
And that was part of the whole LA thing at the time, which I moved out here in the late '90s. And I don't know if you ever saw the movie Swingers, but that was one of Jon Favreau, who later on went on to do Iron Man and so on. But that was one of his first movies. It's kind of his American Graffiti, and that was about the swing revolution here in LA, and it features the band Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, so they were in that movie as well. And like I actually started doing that. I started going to the Derby, which was mentioned in Swingers, and I started taking swing lessons, and I just fell in love with the music and the movement, and that all kind of died after the '90s. Were no longer the '90s, but I still had that music hanging around, and so when I was like, we need kind of a Gatsby thing, and I was starting to go, well, gee, I wonder what band I could use, and then I'm like, well, let me contact Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. And, so I sent him a message, and, they were happy for the love, it seemed. They were like, yeah, well, there we are.
That's actually pretty damn cool. Yeah, actually, here's a question. Considering that Guinevere and the Divinity
Factory?
In the Divinity Factory, sorry. Yeah. Considering that Guinevere and the Divinity Factory, you said is Harry Potter meets Great Gatsby, so this is kind of a period piece?
No. It's set modern day, but the wizard is kind of a Gatsby-esque figure. And so he, wizards live a long time. Like, Dumbledore lived a long time. Merlin lives a long time. You have to ask yourself, as a writer, how long should wizards live? Are you guys writers?
I am. Matt is, and Tank is. Yes. Matt, when Tank gets on, he's actually gonna have a lot to say about this because like he's writing a science fiction novel series called Dreams of Peace, Acts of War, and his characters are it's science fiction fantasy. It's a little bit like, I don't know how familiar you are with Warhammer 40K, but it's kind of it.
Yeah.
But his characters, they're effectively immortals, and he spends a lot of time exploring like what that means, like what the effects of being an immortal are on a human psyche.
Right. Well, my wizards aren't immortal, but I also thought like, well, they shouldn't just. I mean, if you're studying magic, you should be able to use it to prolong your life a little bit, and particularly if life is an area that you're studying. And so I figured that my patron wizard of the house was probably pretty old, or at least by mortal standards. So I figured he'd probably been around like at least 80 to 100 years, despite the fact he appears in his 30s or 40s kind of thing. So, and figured like he would love to throw these retro parties to remind him of back when he was just a normal guy or more, so for him it's nostalgia to throw these flapper events.
Okay, so it's like, so it's him kind of more or less living his heyday.
Yes, exactly. He's living out his heydays, and kind of loves to throw these things and go, well, back in the 20s, I actually did that. And one of the other reasons I really wanted to embrace the Gatsby thing is because we're about to be in the 20s again, and I figured there would be kind of a look back to 100 years ago, and I wanted to capitalize on that by getting a lot of flapper imagery out there, but setting it in modern day, because I feel like that's I'm predicting, and this is just totally me, I could be wrong, but I'm predicting when we get in the 20s, we're going to be looking back to the 20s, and there's going to be some flappery throwbacks, and I'm trying to get out ahead of that.
Well, I can definitely see that kind of fashion catching on with the hipster crowd.
Right.
Yep.
I am, in case you did not know, Preston, I am up in the Pacific Northwest.
Okay.
So I am surrounded by those types.
So, I mean, yeah, so it's not outside of the realm of possibility that people might start going, oh wow, let's have a 20s party. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, let's do the whole swing and flapper thing. It's authentic. It's totally not mainstream, man.
Exactly. And when that movement comes, they're gonna find a music video with an attractive redhead and wizards and Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, and they're gonna go, "Oh wow, there's a comic book associated with it." I'm always
it's just like, dude, I'm happy for you, man, but for me, when I gotta be surrounded, it's just like, I don't know what your experience with hipsters is, Preston, but I find them very insufferable.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, you know, I've lived in LA for quite a few years, and it wasn't until social media, well, particularly with the 2016 election, that things became just acrimoniously divided amongst communities. But I found I've kind of embraced a form of identity politics when I'm around hipsters and whatnot. Is, you know, they'll talk about, you know, cultural relativism and values and whatnot, and how we need to, you know, like, well, for, you know, whatever particular minority group, we need to understand them in the context of their beliefs and their upbringing. And that's where I'd be like, you know what, I think you're right, and I'm a Texan, so you need to understand me in the context of my beliefs and my upbringing.
Believe me, I know that Texans are they are a proud and stubborn lot.
Exactly.
And that's what I love about them. That's what I love about Texas. And I say that as someone who prefers living up in Washington just because I like the climate. But yeah, that is what my dad's side of the family is all like. They're all, but then again, my dad and his sister, they're 7th gen Texans, so it's very deeply ingrained in them.
Right. And, you know, my dad, you know, he was born in Marshall, Texas, you know, in a small little Texas town, and he had to flee the town as a teenager because his family was in a literal family feud with another, and people were dying. And, you know, his mom was like, "You need to get out of here." So give you an idea of my Texas roots. So that's me. And, you know, I love talking. I mean, the thing is, and you find this, Texans I think, have a different attitude towards violence than other people. Particularly, it's way out of step with modern culture, where there's kind of a zero tolerance policy towards any kind of violence at the schoolroom and whatnot. I mean, when I was in kindergarten, I busted somebody on the nose. I used to get sent to the principal's office all the time. But, you know, that was just, you know, like, that was part of being a boy or being a man, was, you know, you kind of had to fight for your beliefs. And the idea was, you know, like, this concept was given to me more than once. You know, after you fought with somebody, you would maybe be closer to them in this kind of strange way.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I mean, like, my dad and his sister and, well, his brother, who's now dead. They all grew up on a place called Cal Farley's Boys Ranch out in Amarillo. It was kind of a home for boys who didn't have one. Their aunt and uncle worked there, so that's how they got to live there.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of. My dad said that was more or less kind of the environment that he grew up in. Like the boys, they were all like very masculine, and like, you know, what you really got any clout is if you were like an athlete. So my dad played basketball and football and ran track, lettered in all three throughout high school, and at one point he had dreams of playing basketball pro, and the only reason that came to a halt is because he had an accident in his senior year of high school when he was a drum major, where he broke his ankle, and so he had to sit out that season.
Oh wow! So that's, I mean, yeah. If we go back and we look at a lot of people who are kind of somewhat colorful celebrities and you know, have a different relationship with violence, a lot of them will come from, you know, like Texas or the American South, because we have different attitudes around masculinity there, and they're very out of step with kind of modern hipster norms. And so that's where, you know, like, my daughter thinks it's funny, but when people are asking me like, okay, so how do you identify as whatever, and I'll go, I'm a Texan. And then my daughter will be like, Dad, you're acting like that's an ethnic group. I'm like, as far as I'm concerned, it is.
You know, I'll just be the first. Let me just say this.
Right.
You're not exactly far off when you say that Texans have a different attitude towards like masculinity and violence. Like, when people think Washington, the first thing they think of is Seattle.
Right.
That's sides, like, Seattle's where you have most of the hipsters out here.
Sure.
Get out of the state, and you're dealing with people who are very right wing, very conservative, and all very libertarian. Like we're basically full of gun nuts, rednecks, and military vets.
Right.
The flatters because we got a lot of bases out here. Like there's Fort Lewis McChord, which is a joint Air Force Army base out in Tacoma. Over in Bremerton, we got a naval base. So yeah, like let me put it this way: Seattle doesn't. If your whole perception of Washington is based on Seattle, you've got a very limited scope of what this state actually is like. Like we're a blue state, and just to give you some perspective, Preston, I'm sorry. Washington is considered a blue state, which it is, but we're still a state that has open carry.
Right.
Yeah.
My first wife was from Eugene, and I've been there a number of times, and I enjoy Oregon and the whole Washington area, and yeah, I mean, it's something that you commonly see, and I think this is just it's a global phenomenon. It's not a Washington phenomenon or a Texas phenomenon. People that are in big urban centers will tend to be left. And people who are out in a rural environment will tend to be more conservative, more small government minded. But when you've got a geographic area that's just dominated by a big city, like New York, for instance, you'll tend to think of, oh wow, like that all New Yorkers are defined by Manhattan, but they're not, and just as all Washingtonians are not defined by Seattle.
Yeah, or how all Michiganders are defined by Detroit, right, Matt?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they're falling apart or killing each other, or have an aging electrical system that has a power outage every 5 days.
So,
yeah,
go ahead.
I can't believe Detroit was ever something, can you?
At this point, it seems like a very and it's weird. You can trace back, like Detroit back to when it was such a powerful industrial center after World War II that the president at the time was like pointing to it as kind of the crown jewel basically of American industry.
Oh, dude! Like back in the day, like when I went to high school out in Michigan,
right?
Back in those days, you could have got right out of high school. You could have just gotten the job at one of the big 3 auto factories, and you would have been set for life. You would have had a good paying job. You would have had a pension. Like there are old auto workers who retired. They got summer cottages out in the Michigan countryside.
Right.
This is how pushy they retired. That is, I mean, but yeah, I mean that was back then. Detroit was the place to be for that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like we kind of went off on a bit of a tangent there, but yeah. So, but yeah, Guinevere and the Divinity Factory, like you said, it's Harry Potter meets Great Gatsby, but it's not really a period piece. It's kind of set in the modern day.
It is set in modern day, yes.
So I'm gonna go on a limb and say that the eponymous Guinevere is sort of the audience proxy.
Yes. Well, in the same way as kind of Harry Potter is, this is an apprentice wizard. They can do a little bit of magic, but not much. And they're being exposed to this magical world. And, she's asking all kind of questions, which the audience is also going to be, asking. So, but I also found that, like I'm already getting some comments off of the Kickstarter. So, she walks, the comic book opens and she's just entering this party. Because, as a writer, I got to decide, okay, where do you start your story? And a lot of amateur writers will start it at like the very beginning of she's a complete normie and, oh, wow, yeah, like she's got to discover magic for the first time. But that has so much exposition and so many clunky scenes that, and, there's really something to be said for just starting a story like, Star Wars: A New Hope. It opens with a Star Destroyer firing on a cargo transport, and then we're immediately going into the cargo transport, and they're like, oh my God, the Empire's about to board us. Like there's something for just starting a story right there where the action is. So for me, I wanted to start it right there where the action is, where she's wading into this big flapper party at, a mansion that, has a wizard she's hoping to interview with, essentially, and gain the favor of. And she's having to go through this world, and she can already do a little bit of magic. So I'm kind of opening up later in the story than, say, a lot of people would. but she enters the party and she sees like people like doing magic out in the open in front of normies, just like levitating and dancing for, you know, fun, fanciful reasons. And she's kind of looking at a friend of hers going like, does this stuff happen all the time? And people are going like, why would she be asking that? And to me, that's a very natural question. You know, like if you know, even if you can do magic, if you're, you know, hanging around with people who are doing magic and they're just doing it out in front of the open, you know, they're there at the supermarket kind of, you know, levitating through as they're picking out their morning cereal. To me, you would be like, does this guy do this every day? Because that's pretty brazen and you know what one would be doing. But because of Harry Potter and how, you know, people are just have this expectation of, well, yeah, you know, you can do magic all the time. But even in Harry Potter, they have rules about don't do it in front of the normies. So I'm not sure why I got a comment on that, but I did get a comment of why is she puzzled as to why people are doing it in front of the normies. But
yeah. So yeah, so yeah, I mean, like that makes sense. I mean, like something I've kind of noticed is that good writers, when they write in magic systems, they always have to write rules like like magic is good at sort of manipulating the world, but there's limits to what it can and can't do.
Right.
And plus, I mean, like plus if you're a character that can basically just do anything they want, that's a boring character.
Right. Exactly. So go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna let you keep going.
Oh, so I had to decide what Guinevere can do in terms of magic. I don't know if you're familiar with the role-playing game Mage.
Mage the Ascension or Mage the Awakening?
Either one. I mean, I know that they're technically different, but they both have, you know, kind of the same underlying system in terms of mages can specialize in different areas. I know that like they eventually split it into 9 spheres. Like they took what was entropy and Mage these Ascension, and then they split it into death and something else. But
yeah, there's like I know what you're talking about because yeah, I'm a big fan of White Wolf games. I actually have a group that plays Werewolf the Apocalypse every Thursday.
Right. Oh, cool.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. In fact, yeah. But yeah, so yeah, there's like different essentially there's different schools of magic, exactly, and there's like rules about what you can and can't do, like casting magic in front of sleepers.
Right. Yes.
That causes like a break in reality. That
exactly, which is why she is asking at the party, like, does this stuff go on all the time? Because that's kind of a violation of the magical, you know, society that she's understood is, you know, you don't brazenly cast magic in front of the normies, which, you know, I mean, is kind of a general rule, but it's also one that they codified in the Mage system. But I've submitted this project to White Wolf, and they've gotten back to me and said they're considering it, which probably means no. But you know, that I could make it an official Mage, you know, Mage the Awakening or Mage the Ascension comic. And in that way, like the Gatsby figure is pretty cool in the original system. If we make him, they had a group called the Cult of Ecstasy. I don't know if you know much about the Mage system.
I know what you're talking about. Like they're based, like if I remember correctly, I think one of the books said that what was his name? Guy from The Doors.
Jim Morrison.
Jim Morrison, yes, Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison was a member of the Cult of Ecstasy.
Right. And by the way, when you go into my wizard, my master wizard, when she finds him, his name is Francis Gatz. He eventually takes her into his magic sanctum, and it's dedicated to the Doors. They've got the guitars on the wall and Jim Morrison prints and stuff. So yes, I use that.
And why not? Doors have good music.
Exactly. And he's teaching her to astrally project, which she's never done before. And again, when I'm so if it eventually becomes a Mage the Awakening comic, then he'll be Cult of Ecstasy, and if not, then he won't. But I decided, like, you know, like, okay, you know, he understands spirit magic, but she doesn't, and so he's kind of, you know, initiating her and like, let's go into the spirit realm. And as he's doing that, you know, he puts some stuff in her champagne to help her transcend. But he's also over there on the keyboard and he's playing Break On Through, because I figured, you know, that would be cool.
All right, cool. So yeah, okay, so yeah, Guinevere is essentially the audience proxy. So like she knows some things about magic, but we're more or less learning about the world through her. Exactly. I'm gonna assume she is not like the she does not share a lot in common with her namesake.
No. And one of the things that I also thought about and was a good touch from Mage is that in Mage, you never give out your real name.
Oh yeah, they all have like magic names because
they all have magic names.
Yeah,
because
have power.
Yeah, because your true name, as they would call it, like your birth name, allows you to be targeted by a spell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's yeah, that is actually so. Guinevere's just a name she uses.
It's just a name she uses. It's not her real name, and when as part of the backstory to the character, because the character is attractive, because it's based on an attractive woman. I have the character has a background that she was a stripper at one point, and that was her stage name.
Oh.
And there's this scene where, you know, kind of Francis Gatz, the master wizard, is, you know, he's commenting like, "Oh, Guinevere, that's a good wizard name you've picked for me." She's like, "Thanks, that was my stage name. Tiffany and Amber are already taken." And he does like a spit take. Oh, yeah, okay. So I'm giving her kind of a humble beginning, if you will.
So my main character, but the main character of my book, Changeling, is named Maeve, and that's a fairy queen. And Maeve doesn't. Let me put it this way: if you look up the stories that character is from, okay, I guess the short version is the mythological Maeve is responsible for the death of Cuchulainn. My Maeve is a very shy but very sweet girl.
Oh, neat. So is it at all related to the Westworld character? Or?
No.
Okay.
No. There's a bit of
we get that one a lot, right?
I found her name. It was nameless, but it's just like but that's just because Changeling's very influenced by a lot by Celtic folklore. So
right.
But like I said, like my Maeve is not like the mythological Maeve in any capacity. Like she's like, the Maeve from the Maeve that got Cuchulainn killed. She's very cunning, very wily, but also very ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
And I said my Maeve is very shy but also very sweet.
Neat.
Yeah, she's just. But yeah, so I mean, like, is there anything you can tell us about the plot without giving too much away?
Oh, sure. So it evolved slowly over time. All right, after I had finished writing the script for White Lily and started developing that one into a comic book, I'm like, all right, so now I need to work on my next story. And so it initially started as I'm going to write a horror script. And so the story of what you're looking at now had its genesis as I'm just going to write a horror script for some friends of mine. And so, you know, Julie, you know, was one of the friends. And there was another friend that I have out here named Marcus, and he is a boxer from England. And he was teaching boxing to my daughter. And as a Texan, I found his attitudes about violence quite refreshing, because he would be like, "No, you don't understand, mate. Back in England, if you got a difference with a fella, you know, you can just go at it with fisticuffs." And you know, as a Texan, I can kind of admire that. And we certainly felt out of place here in Los Angeles with their attitudes about stuff. And Marcus wanted to get into acting, and so I made him. He and Julie were essentially my two main characters. At this point, his character won't be introduced until issue 2, because when I was starting to present the story to writers groups, every time Julie's character, Guinevere, was on the screen doing stuff, people loved it. They loved this attractive woman, and her magic abilities, by the way, are you know, she can't do lightning bolts or fly or anything like that. She, if we're putting it in the mage terms, she is good at mind magic, kind of Jedi mind tricking people. And in part, that's what we're used to attractive women doing anyway. You know, it's kind of getting away with stuff and being like, how did you do that? And for Guinevere, you know, she kind of blurs the lines between just a suggestion made as an attractive woman and so someone who's actually casting a spell when it comes to her ability to make suggestions. But I started with her as kind of like a forest mage, kind of druidic in the opening story. You know, she was out in the forest kind of trying to be initiated into the circle of nature witches and stuff. And, you know, that was cool. people liked it. But then my daughter really fell in love with The Great Gatsby, and we loved the Baz Luhrmann adaptation with, you know, that big spectacle party and all the production value. And she was just heartbroken that the character of Gatsby had died. And I was saying, hey, you know, like, look, Gatsby he's a character. You can put him in your own work. And I'm like, you know what? I could even put him in mine. So I rewrote it. Instead of being a forest, what if her introduction was, you know, kind of this big party, you know, right out of The Great Gatsby? And so I wrote that up, and the people at the writing group loved it. They loved the big magic spectacle. Then they loved the idea of kind of mages just being hedonistic, and, you know, more or less I kind of fell back into the cult of ecstasy thing completely on accident of what if these people were just using magic for their own personal pleasure as part of an excuse of seeking enlightenment, and people liked that. So that's what comic 1 basically introduces us to, is, you know, she meets this magical society, and then she gets her quest, which will then introduce her to kind of the Marcus figure there in issue 2. And I mean, that's pretty much the plot of issue 1, is just kind of setting the world, introducing her master wizard, setting out the mission, and then, you know, she kind of goes out into the world.
Oh, cool. Also, Tank just finally showed up. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Tank.
Doing well, but my connection's a little bit wonky, so I might sound like a robot every now and again.
Yeah, this was the guy. This was the guy, Preston, I told you, who had the science fiction series with the Immortals.
Oh, neat. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah.
Or not.
Well, where to start?
you need to have this down for like an elevator pitch. You need to be like 60-second go, you know. So.
Elevator pitch. Far future, power armor, big guns, magic, immortals. There you go.
Okay. Oh, there we go. All right, sounds good.
Yeah, and obviously set on the backdrop of a brewing galactic war.
Oh, well, everyone needs a great galactic war in science fiction. I mean, they couldn't even get away from it in Star Trek. I know Gene Roddenberry kind of wanted his universe to be free of war, but whenever you look back at the good episodes, there tends to be a war setting there, like either against the Klingons or the Romulans or something.
There's a reason among Trek, Deep Space Nine is considered the best series.
Right.
It actually depends on which camp you're traveling in. Like there's the camp that says it's Next Generation, which
right.
I can't argue against. But I
don't like Next Gen. I'm sorry. I'm going to go down as a Next Gen hater.
Yeah, I'm firmly in the camp that says Deep Space Nine is the best. Matt, where would you say you fall in?
The troll answer would be Enterprise.
Uh,
But I'd have to say the original series.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a fairly safe answer.
I mean, honestly, I like the design of the ships.
Sure.
Better. And as much as I like Deep Space Nine, I can't get beyond the fact that Paramount stole the concept.
Allegedly.
that kind of stuff goes on all the time. So.
Oh yeah.
I'm just gonna be the spanner in the works here. I personally think Voyager was best.
I love Voyager too, honestly. Well, all right. I like Voyager after we got rid of Neelix's girlfriend. I don't remember what her name was, but she was bad. And we introduced 7 of 9.
Yeah, that's when everyone seemed to like it.
Yeah, because Jerry Ryan was attractive. That helps. But 7 of 9 was kind of a compelling character, and that you started to get some differences in the crew, and that she now had this entirely different philosophical approach. She would continually approach everything from kind of this collectivist, what's good for the hive stuff that came from the Borg. And, she was also a very sexual character in that, she played by an attractive woman, but the character herself would have this attitude about sex I remember at one point, like, I want to say it was like Harry Kim or, is like indicating some, or, she's noticing that he's interested in her. And she's like, would you like to copulate? And and does her very matter of fact kind of stance on the whole thing was an interaction that I'd never seen in Star Trek before. So I like that.
You know what I liked about it, barring the fact of that, is the whole trying to get home, and every single time that looks like they might get somewhere, they have to make the choice. Either we do this and we do get home faster, but then there's always this negative, so they kind of have to play off the, are we going to do this but potentially screw somebody over so hard that they, at the end of the day, have to make such a hard choice that sometimes they didn't take the fast route home.
Right. And there were ethical and the whole story engine of a ship trying to get home, interacting with the planets of the week. It led to these interesting philosophical questions of what are our obligations to this world that we just discovered, and as well as and then we got Seven of Nine, who was also kind of asking her own kind of moral obligations, and that in that character she's like, oh, you want to copulate, well, let's go, and then people had to explain to her, well, maybe that's not okay, maybe that's, and it gave some interesting grounds to have these discussions of how should we be treating each other, and that's ultimately what I think a good story does.
Yeah, I think that I did like the idea behind the premise. Like it was you had a Voyager which was trapped in an unknown space, and they had to find their way home.
Right.
I think kind of needed a little work. If you ask me, like if people want an idea of what that could have looked like, just look at the 2005 Battlestar Galactica series, which
I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, I did up until season 4. It got weird.
It did get weird.
It went off the rail.
Yeah, when
it lost the plot at that point.
Yeah.
They started to lean too much on the esoteric side there with a lot of the questions that they asked.
Yes.
Yeah, when it was focused on the whole, we got this ragtag fleet of ships. They have limited resources. Everything is a struggle. That's when it was really good.
Yes, and therein is a concept that all writers need to keep in mind, and that Gene Roddenberry couldn't quite grasp, and that's that it's only when, well, here I was a gambler. That's why my comic book company is called Pocket Jacks Comics, and there was a saying by one of the poker gurus I followed, which was, it's when you're on a down streak, or it's when things that are bad are happening to you, that your character is really tested. Because if you owe somebody money and you're on a hot streak, it's easy to pay them. But it's only when you're worried about making the rent and someone's like, you owe me money, that it matters, whether you have character or not. And similarly, in fiction, it only really matters as to how we treat other planets when there's real stakes involved in the story. When in Next Gen, when we're part of the Federation, which can generate resources at will, you can just walk up to any wall and get a diamond or hot Earl Grey tea or whatever you want from the replicator. That, like the moral questions of, oh, we met a planet. Oh, they do drugs. Let's give them the don't do drugs lecture. I mean, the episodes were just dumb. But it's when characters have stakes, that they have to make a trade-off of this for that we get an interesting story.
And that's why my favorite Star Trek episode is In the Pale Moonlight.
What's that one?
That is an episode of Deep Space Nine where Sisko unwittingly becomes a party to assassination with the Cardassian Garrick, and that is all to get the Romulans to join the war effort.
Right. Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And the end of the episode has him saying to the audience, essentially, I can live with it, and I do it again. Right.
Exactly. And, therein is, I think, there was I like to cultivate ideas and see where they take me. And sometimes ideas can come from people that maybe ideologically you're kind of opposed to, but maybe they got a point and it's worth thinking about. But Saul Alinsky wrote a book called Rules for Radicals.
Oh, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. And one of the things he said in that book, which I think is probably true, and that's that he said it's not a matter of whether the ends justify the means or they don't. You have to always ask yourself, of any particular act, does this particular end justify these particular means? And I think in that regard, he is correct. So, you know, like going with Sisko, he had to ask himself, do these particular ends of, you know, the Romulans entering the war on our side justify these particular means? And he came up with the answer, yes. And he didn't like that because he wanted to morally cling to a certain set of standards to apply to all actions. But he had to accept that maybe that wasn't the case.
Yeah, it's just like I said, he's. I can remember there's one reviewer called SF Debris who, when he did a review of that episode, he said that moment was not him giving his captain's log. That was his confession.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And therein, I think, is something that, unfortunately, it seems largely divorced from a lot of modern stories, and that's the emotional hook. And that, you know, like, we all feel bad about actions that we've done, and we want to confess them to someone. And so when we see a character doing that, we feel kind of bonded to that character.
Yeah,
and
like, yeah, I was gonna bring up that there's a great moment in, what was it? I think it's in Crime and Punishment, where, does anyone remember what the main character's name in that book was? I forgot it.
Raskolnikov.
Yeah, Raskolnikov. Yeah, that was his name. It's like after Raskolnikov has done his deed, and he asks God for forgiveness.
Right.
And it's a very human moment, because like even if you don't really believe in God, you can understand that emotional state of mind. Like, you want to seek absolution, you want to find forgiveness for the wrongs you've done, and that is something literally anyone can understand.
Well, cool. I mean, as a producer or / writer, you know, like, I get exposed to a lot of people's stories, and you know, I hear a lot of pitches, and one of my most common criticisms that I will level at somebody is I'll go, I don't feel there's an emotional hook. And unfortunately, a lot of people will, and not to be throwing stones, but I do a lot of, you know, comic shows, and I'm down there in Artist Alley or the small press area. So it's just me hanging out with a bunch of other, you know, indie guys who maybe have one book to their name. And a lot of times we don't get a lot of traffic. So I'll be sitting there, you know, like, exchanging books with people. And, you know, like, somebody will be like, oh, it's, you know, it's some story. It's discount Batman or discount Wolverine, because a lot of times people are just kind of aping the majors. And there's a guy who fights crime and he does stuff, and I'll be like, where's your emotional hook? And people will be like, I'm like, if you don't got one, you don't got a story. Because, you know, there needs to be conflict, and there needs to be a character that has a humanity we can identify with.
Yeah, because it seems like a lot of modern comic writers, especially, well, I would say a lot of modern writers in general, like, they want to be clever,
right?
Instead of humor. And one YouTuber I follow put it, there's plenty of cleverness to go around.
Right. And, you know, going back to Harry Potter, the story becomes different if he was not kind of a neglected, somewhat abused child, right?
Well, one of our mutual friends, Dan Sakharov, has a few does have a few criticisms towards that. But yeah, you are right. It does sort of become a different story. Where, like, I don't know, like kind of mainly Dan's criticism of that is that. Considering the home situation, the domestic situation that Harry comes from, like, he should not be this good of a kid.
He should not. You're right, and in that way, he is kind of a not relatable character. One of the things that I did with Guinevere, that people thought was kind of cool, is that she, you know, again, we were opening with her entering the party. So we know nothing about her backstory. We know nothing about the party she's entering. We're kind of finding out in real time. But she gets taken on this journey into the spirit realm. And when she's there, I had to think, and I had to go, okay, what should you look like in the spirit realm? Because you no longer have a body. And so, you know, we're all writers here. I'll just ask you guys, what do you think your spirit realm self should look?
I'm thinking something it should probably be like a reflection of your soul, I suppose. Like something.
Sure.
So,
I agree.
but that could literally be anything.
It could. I decided you should see your spiritual soul should be how you see yourself.
So it's like her idealized self.
Not her idealized self, how she really sees herself. Like there is a you that you present to the world, right?
Uh-huh.
And then there's a you that you hide from the world, that you kind of keep close to yourself, that you don't let people know about. Because
there's the whole idea with personas and shadows.
Right. So I thought when she goes out to the world, she, you know, her self view is going to be kind of nakedly presented for the first time. And so when she astrally projects, she goes from this strong, confident, gorgeous woman to a woman who has bruises on her face because at one point she was dating an abusive guy who beat the crap out of her. And that event so traumatized her that from there on, she viewed everything from this victim mentality, from this kind of timid victim mentality. And it's because, you know, I've known a fair number of people who became successful or who got power, like Harry Potter, but they could not outgrow their roots. It's because they had, you know, an abusive upbringing or parents that didn't love them or whatever, that they were still, despite the fact they had greatness or talent or abilities, that was their underlying conflict that they still had to do. And until they resolved it, they could never really achieve, you know, whatever it was, greatness, I guess we'll call it. So
yeah, I mean, like that's something that I think a lot of that people can understand. So if I'm picking up on something, Preston, does this mean that Guinevere's character arc is more or less overcoming this abusive past?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's, you know, Francis Gatz appears as a wizard just because he sees himself as a wizard. He's like, this is how I see myself, and that's how you see yourself. And then he explains, which at this point, it's kind of me, the writer, talking to you, the audience. He explains, you can never do great things as long as you see yourself as a victim. And so he then gives her a mission. He's like, you have to transcend. You have to go. And then this is, again, me as the writer talking to you, the audience. You have to go out in the world and you have to help people. And once you're helping people transcend their own personal limitations, their own background, you will transcend from a victim into someone who can do things, someone who is effective. And that is kind of the mission that she goes on. That frames our story.
That is actually really interesting. And Tank, I know you kind of came in late, but I mean, like, does Guinevere and the Divinity Factory kind of sound like a book you dig?
I'll have to see a little bit more before I can actually make an opinion. I do like to find out a little bit more about something before I normally make up an opinion about it. Hence why, when just as an example, when the original Nintendo Wii launched, it got a lot of derision from people this side. So I was like, let's wait and see what happens. So I tried it out, and then I made up my own opinion. Yeah, it's not for me, but it's not as bad as you're saying. So I kind of have to see something first, try it first before I make an informed opinion on it.
Well, I mean,
but it sounds interesting so far.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of sold on it. Like the Preston described the premise as Harry Potter meets Great Gatsby.
That first part, they kind of loses me.
He is not a fan of Harry Potter.
Well, Harry Potter only in that it's people who can do magic. There is no British boarding school element to it, so really it's not a Harry Potter story. It's really kind of like a Merlin the Magician story, but people know Harry Potter these days.
So more like Great Gatsby with magic.
Yes, it's Great Gatsby with magic.
That's a much better pitch.
Okay, fair enough. Great Gatsby with magic.
Sorry, it's just you mentioned Harry Potter. I turn off.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, again,
Try to watch it. I try to read it.
I try and customize my offering to my audience, and like a lot of times I'm at a comic table and I'm just looking at people, and if I say Harry Potter and their face goes, I'm like, or Merlin.
Damn.
It's just. Sorry, you want to say?
I was gonna ask though. I mean, like, if this is if this is sort of like a take on Great Gatsby, does that mean we're gonna have the moment where Francis Gatz says you can repeat the past?
I haven't quite decided what his origin story is going to be. For right now, he is just a kind of generic figure. In 2 years' time, he will be much more fleshed out, and that is for legal reasons. There's something very magical that happens in 2 years' time, January 2021, which I'm sure nobody here knows. But does anyone want to guess what happens January 2021?
I think what was supposed to happen was the end of the world.
Okay. Well, that would be certainly a great event, but not good for comic sales.
Yeah.
So, January 2021, a certain work enters the public domain. A work that is very relevant to this particular project. Anyone want to guess?
Why do I get the feel, guys? I have no idea. I have literally no idea what he's talking about.
Well, you guys know my whole background on this, so I'm saying
okay. I'll just tell you again. The work, the novel, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald enters the public domain January 2021.
Oh.
At which point, anyone can take that work and make derivative works of it and put them out there for commercial sale.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
Okay. So with the good, we're also going to see a lot of bad.
So,
True.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, the Gatsby, I expect in 2021, you're going to start seeing a lot of Gatsby-related projects because just like for the same reason we see a lot of Call of Cthulhu projects because Lovecraft's works are in the public domain. Anyone can make a Lovecraft story.
Mm-hmm.
And come January 2021, anyone can make a Gatsby story.
Yeah, but it is gonna be interesting to see like how people try to make a sequel out of that, considering that Gatsby dies at the end.
Exactly. So some of the thoughts I've come up with, I've come up with two different thoughts here. I'll throw them out. I'll see what you guys think. I'm soliciting feedback for when the time comes. But I thought one would be, because I like the idea of Gatsby doing magic. So I'm kind of testing that idea out in this story as kind of this generic Gatsby-esque figure who is not necessarily tied to the original work for legal reasons. But what if it was actually what if my story was an actual sequel to the novel, and everything that happened in the novel, including his death in the swimming pool, actually happened? But what if we put that in a magical universe where there are ghosts and wizards and vampires and werewolves? He just didn't know about them because, vampires didn't walk in and say, hey, I'm a vampire. Like, it was a secret world kind of thing, right? Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I can see where you're going with this.
So, if the story of F. Scott Fitzgerald's story, The Great Gatsby, happened in a magical universe, then we might assume that because Gatsby was wronged, that he suffered an injustice, that he was obsessed with the woman of Daisy, that when he was dead, his spirit might stick around in ghost-like form, right?
Because he has unfinished business.
Yeah, he has unfinished business. And what else do we know about Gatsby? Just going from the straight novel, that guy, according to the novel, like, he was just a high school student who got drafted into World War I. He came back a war hero who was broke, and then a few years later, he was a millionaire. This guy is amazing. That's just from the original source material, right?
Yeah. I think like the novels seem to imply that he made like his fortune in bootlegging. Yes.
The novel implies that he is a very shady character who will do what is necessary to get stuff done. So if we are taking this shady character who's charismatic, somewhat unscrupulous, but extremely effective, is it within the realm of possibility that perhaps the ghost of Gatsby was able to broker some deal in order to be re-entered into the real world? Some deal that he made with a wizard, say.
Well, considering that the actual Gatsby had essentially sort of kind of he wasn't even using his real name, to be honest. Like
right, it's an assumed name.
He wasn't even who he said he was.
He wasn't.
So yeah, this is complete in this sort of context. That's completely within his character.
Exactly. So we can have a sequel where Gatsby's doing magic, where everything that happened in that novel happened in that magic universe. So that's kind of how I'm thinking of it when 2021 comes along and I can publish The Great Wizard Gatsby. Dun, dun, dun. So anyway.
That actually sounds pretty cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
now I had another version of the story that I thought of one day, and that's, what if F. Scott Fitzgerald existed in the world of my story? What if he, as a novelist, existed, and what if he wrote a story called The Great Gatsby, and it did
well?
Getting
that up in this.
And what if, as his dying wish or something, he was like, as an artist, we all feel bonded to our work, and what if his dying wish was essentially that story goes on to greatness, and that he kind of worked this death magic that infused his soul into the story itself. And then as the story became popular and more people were reading it, we kind of collectively worked this spell that brought about an idealized form of his character, Gatsby, into being. So that was kind of origin story number 2. I'm not sure if I like that one as much as origin story number 1, but those are 2 different ideas I'm toying around with right now.
I mean, the second one is actually the first one. I will say it makes sense, has a lot of narrative and thematic sense.
Right.
Second one is interesting, but it's also very meta.
Yeah, it does tend to be more meta. The thing that he gets to do as kind of, and then the second one is the character of Gatsby gets to critique the novel of Gatsby. He gets to go, oh yeah, I was written in this kind of strange way, but like, why is he obsessed with Daisy? To me, as a student of the novel, like, what is his obsession with Daisy? I mean, you can understand as a 17-year-old boy being obsessed with an attractive woman, but you go off to war and you see the horrors of, what was the most horrific war like people had ever seen. Like, it wasn't noble anymore. It wasn't about shooting a guy, then trying to summon the will to hate him enough to kill him with a rifle bullet. It was about just machine guns operating, as people described it. It was like factory work. You weren't even really aiming the machine gun. You were just feeding bullets into it and kind of arcing it out over a wide range and using a lot of artillery and chemical weapons. I mean, it was mechanization applied to warfare, the first time we'd ever seen it, and it was horrific, and it went on every single day. So can you imagine a guy who goes off and becomes a hero in that war environment coming back and being like, and I'm still obsessed with this woman I knew when I was 17? Like, it doesn't work.
He was also in perfect health as well.
Yeah, exactly. In perfect health, completely unscarred, and then he becomes a millionaire. Like, the character of Gatsby is very unrealistic. But
yeah, but to be fair, like I said, like, he's not. What kind of makes the character work is that we don't follow him, because everything kind of is told through Nick Carraway's perspective.
Nick Carraway's perspective, exactly. So, but that's where I, as a writer, now having to drill down on the character of Gatsby, I have to decide. Well,
Guys, I just heard my bell ring. I'll be right back in a moment. You guys carry this?
All right.
Yep. So, I'd have to say that a lot of what seemed to be in The Great Gatsby, what was told about Gatsby from his point of view,
right?
A lot of it could have been just one big lie, such as being a war hero. This is before the internet, before really anything that could allow big stories to be told across the world. And he was in an area of the world where it was the least affected by the war.
Yes, this is true. So he could have not gone to war at all. But we have to remember, we're dealing with a story that people already know, and they've already kind of made their mind up about it. I remember, when I was last in my writers group, a guy was presenting, his ideas for a sequel to Blade Runner. And you see a lot of people come up with, hey, I wrote a sequel to whatever. And what I explained to them is you have to understand that if you're writing a story from scratch, you can make the characters anything you want. It's your world. It's your sandbox. Do whatever you want with it. But when you're dealing with an already existing property, like in Blade Runner, it's like, people already have their minds made up about Rachel and about Decker. And if you start presenting them in a way that they're not comfortable with, they will tune you out and they will reject your work.
Which is what happened with The Last Jedi.
Exactly. And so, go ahead.
2049, sorry.
Yeah. So Gatsby is it's a figure that occupies a lot of people's consciousness. We don't think about it, but people who don't even read have read Gatsby a lot of times because it was an assigned work. And out of all the assigned works you got in high school, that was the one that probably had the most emotional hook, and that Gatsby was a somewhat relatable figure. We can all identify with being desperately in love with someone, making poor decisions, and kind of the injustice that we go through at the hands of people who look down on us. And so a lot of people have this emotional reaction to Gatsby, and that he was wronged. And if you instead say, yeah, in my version he was actually a jerk who completely lied about his war record, and you start going against people's perceptions of what that character is, they will reject you. And so I can't do that.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Yeah.
I did not read Gatsby in high school. I think what I got my son reading though was it was 1984 and Tom Sawyer.
Oh yeah.
Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn.
Huck Finn. Oh, I love that one. Huck Finn was a great one.
Some of the works that are assigned to us, we got Macbeth.
That's also a great one. I'm going to be right back, by the way.
Okay.
Grabbing a drink.
Yeah. So I would have figured it'd be a lot more South African literature, Tank.
We had a mix. We also got Huck Finn at the one later year. Close to the end, so they gave us Macbeth, they gave us Huck Finn, some of the local works. I'm trying to remember now, which was the big one? Phila's Child, but it's Afrikaans work. They made a movie of and everything. The basic idea of the story is a white child is found by a colored lady, and he is raised by them as one of their own. And then eventually, after he turns 13, the government find him because they found his real parents, and they take him away. And then obviously the book looks at what happens to the lady Phila as she tries to come to terms with what has happened, because her son Benjamin, because she named him, has been taken away from her because she found him abandoned. And obviously later on, when he has grown up and everything, he also returns, and the reconciliation and all those things. It's a very heartfelt and human story.
Yeah.
Now you have to understand that this book was written during the time of apartheid. So colored lady, white child. So you can already understand that the government was already looking at it. How can we ban this?
Damn. Yeah. So, oh boy, yeah. I mean, like they've been trying to ban Huck Finn just because it has multiple utterances of a word that we can't get away with saying.
Which is probably why they're now stopping the sale of Horatio Hornblower novels. Except that it doesn't have anything to do with the N-word. It's everything to do with one of the characters' slave.
Yeah, like I said, yeah, I think I had a world literature class. I think my junior or senior year, and the books that we got assigned in that class was 1984. There was also what was that one? Things Fall Apart, and this one book about the people who survived the atomic bomb out in Japan. I can't remember the name of it, but it was different. It was like essentially a collection of different stories, and all fictional, I believe, and each one of them was a survivor of the Hiroshima bomb. I think one of them was like a German priest.
Wow.
I just I got an email from Alterna Comics. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that at all.
We know them. We are very familiar with them.
Cool. So I presented a video on YouTube so did you guys see Peter Simeti's kind of state of the industry or whatever talk he put out like a week or 10 days ago? Yep. Where he was talking about his sales and kind of his direct sales were going up, but his sales through Diamond were kind of static or dipping a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Go on.
So I'm an entrepreneurial guy. I've been involved in businesses and whatnot, and comics is itself a business, and it's what I enjoy. But I started thinking, okay, and so I put this out in a YouTube video you guys can watch. But essentially, I was starting to think, okay, what is coming around the corner? And really, if you apply, your intellect towards the problem, you can come up with some pretty observable solutions. And that's, let's say there's a guy. Let's do a thought experiment and say there's a guy or a woman. I'm not particularly hung up on gender, who is just a rock star of the Kickstarter Indiegogo comic book community. Like every idea they put out there, boom, is just bringing in 6 figures, maybe even getting to 7 figures kind of thing, right? They're doing that.
It's like that.
Yeah, exactly. So if this guy's just a rock star, it would only make sense that a company would spring up around them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you have to ask yourself, how would that company be structured? And clearly, the company would be structured, focusing on the primary customer outreach being the crowdfunding campaigns, and then there would be other distribution, kind of like an afterthought of, and you can also buy us through, here's our Amazon store, and Diamond also picks up our stuff. But the distribution through Diamond is, say, Marvel and DC's primary source of revenue. It's their primary source of distribution, right?
Yeah, there's an account on Twitter I follow, and I think a couple other people in our circles do, called Comics Perch.
Yeah. He
put out a thread, I think it might have been yesterday or the day before, where he talked about like how the problem with distribution lies with Diamond, and they just do not have the wherewithal to fix it.
Right. But this new comic company that we conceived of that was focused around kind of a rock star of crowdfunding, Diamond would just be kind of an afterthought in terms of how they're reaching people. Their primary outreach and their primary method of monetizing their intellectual property doesn't involve Diamond. You see what I'm thinking?
Yeah. And
so then I was thinking, like, well, that's going to kind of probably be the comic book company of the future. And then as a guy who's out working a lot of shows, and, if there's a comic show, particularly in Dallas or LA, I'll sign up for it. And I'll also sign up for shows that aren't comic shows. Like I was doing a toy show a couple of weeks ago where everybody in the room was selling Transformers except for me selling comic books. So I'm used to selling comics to a non-comics necessarily audience. And I've inquired around, and there's a local flea market in Dallas, and they're open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they will rent me a table for $60 a week. And I already know from working shows, like I can easily make a solid return on that, right?
Go
ahead.
Definitely as a guy who's a natural salesman, Preston.
Yeah, thank you. And so I'm starting to think like, so if I can already make a return on $60 a week, how could I make even more money? And that's if I expanded my product line, well, it's going to be hard for me to come out with 4 or 5 new comic books in the next 6 months. But there are other people out there who already have comic books like Alterna Comics with, $1.50 price point that would allow me to fill out my table with more stuff for me to sell. And so I kind of put out there, like, what if I just started, basically, I reinvented the newsstand. Like the newsstand used to be where you would get your morning paper and your coffee. No one reads the morning paper anymore, and they get their coffee at Starbucks. That's why you don't see newsstands. But that doesn't.
I apologize for Starbucks existing, Preston.
Oh, sorry. So I'm just like, what if we kind of took the newsstand and we instead made it kind of centered around a personality who was there selling comic books, like me or you or anybody else who's like, you know what, I'm here. These are comic books I make or involved with or am passionate about. And that's something that you don't see in most comic stores. In most comic stores, you walk in and, you know, to borrow some concepts from Chris Rock, they're not selling comics, they're offering comics. They're like, you know, you can look around. There's Marvel over there. There's DC over there. And they'll just sit back behind their cash register. And as soon as you've picked out the things that you like, they'll make a decision. But what if instead you were at a desk at a flea market or at a newsstand walking along, and people were just kind of walking along, and you had limited shelf space, and you were like, pardon me, do you have a minute to hear about a story about the 2 deadliest female fighter pilots that ever lived? And people are like, no, I'm busy. Wait, what did you say? I'm like, I made a comic book about the 2 deadliest female fighter pilots that ever lived. They flew for the Soviet Union during the Second World War. She not only was the deadliest female fighter pilot, she was also the very first woman, and I would show you in the book, to ever score a confirmed kill, which happened at the Battle of Stalingrad. People would be like, I did not know that women did that. I'm like, yes, it's right here in this comic book, which is only $5. And, you know, suddenly you're able to convert people into customers. And, you know, and I can do it with my comics as well as other people's comics, and I can turn a great profit. So there's a distribution model right there. And so I proposed that to Alterna Comics, and they just emailed me back that they're on board. So I'm going to order some product from them. And I've also got, there's a guy named Jay Photos who puts out some great Frank Franzetta, you know, the guy who does fantasy paintings.
Yeah.
Death Dealer and so on.
Very familiar with that work.
Yeah. So he's got, I could go over the table and show you, but I'm just going to, it'll be in your mind. So he's taken like Death Dealer and some of Frazetta's most popular works, and he's gotten permission from the estate to publish graphic novels, aka trade paperbacks, where he takes Death Dealer and he tells you the backstory of Death Dealer, or he tells you the backstory of Swamp Demon. And those are, you know, nicely self-contained. You don't have to have an understanding of Captain America or Hulk or how they interface in order to pick up that story and appreciate it. And it's something that you can imagine buying as a gift. You know, you could be like, hey, do you know anyone who likes fantasy stuff like this famous, you know, painting from history, and here's a comic related project about it, and it's all together in this nice hardcover thing, which I'll sell to you for $50. So, you know, like, it's the idea of let's just do self-contained stories that you can sell, and then at the really low price point, you know, I can have Alterna Comics for $1.50. If you're like, oh, and you got a young kid here, why don't you read some of these comic books? And at $1.50, it doesn't even matter if your kid takes it and tears it up. So it's a nice profitable idea I had, and I'm going to be putting it together. I'll let you know how it works. And of course, you know, everybody else out there is encouraged to investigate how to, you know, profitably become your own distributor.
Yeah, we are true.
The idea, I suppose, at the end of the day is to find a way, because with all the books that are being launched on Indiegogo right now via Patreon and all these other methods of funding books,
right,
you kind of have to sidestep the diamond distribution model, because they, from what I've been seeing, is they're not very accommodating to newer players.
They're not.
You kind of have to be the established big names, and even then, I mean, I've seen horror stories about guys who booked their copies of, I'm going to use Rags as a perfect example of this. They ordered their comic from their LCS and it never arrived because Diamond screwed up the shipment.
Right. Exactly.
And Antarctic Press has been a publisher for about 35 years. So they're not above screwing over in any kind of indie publisher.
Yeah, I mean, like, if that's what they did to an established property like Antarctic, I mean, think what they do to a up and comer like Wicked.
So wouldn't it just be easier if, you know, like, because again, I do a lot of comic shows and I just meet comic creators and I'm just like, oh, hey, I remember that book you pitched me out of the many books I see. I like that one. I want to sell it here at my little flea market newsstand. And now you have a direct relationship with someone where you're paying them money. There's not a middleman. They're sending you a shipment. If your shipment's damaged, you say, hey, here's a picture. You know, like, you're working it out between yourselves. And I think it's a beautiful model. I think it's the future, quite frankly.
Hopefully, because like man, I mean, I don't think there's any getting around it, but like Diamond has a monopoly on the distribution part of the comics industry. I mean, like, it's a monopoly. Like, Like,
Yeah.
it's amazing. Like, no one has. It's amazing that the federal government hasn't gone after them with the Antitrust Act.
Sure.
But I guess maybe it's just because they don't care about comics enough to do it.
Right. Yeah. No one really cares about that market. So.
But yeah, but it is hopeful. But hopefully though, I mean, like if there is an upside to that, it's though that the whole monopoly thing is, it's not sustainable long term, and I think we are going to probably live to see a future. I mean, a post-Diamond future where,
right,
instead of having just one giant distributor, it's probably going to come down to like more like it's going to be like smaller regional distributors.
Eventually, Diamond will be absorbed into Amazon. That's going to happen.
Oh boy, oh God, help us when that happens.
Right. But the thing that I think most people don't think about is that your local traditional comic book store, if you kind of summon a mental image for whatever your local comic book store is, and you're walking into that, imaginary theoretical comic book store, you're probably going to get the experience that I described. Whereas, there's a guy sitting behind a counter, he greets you, he says, "There's Marvel, there's DC, help yourself. Let me know if you need me to create a pull list," and that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah. A friend of ours who's Trent Luther, who is one half of the Rags team.
Right.
He, I actually had a conversation with him about like how, because I was trying to get Rags at a few of my local LCSs up in Tacoma.
Mm-hmm.
Not one of them would said
Right.
they could take Rags, and
Exactly.
what Trent was telling me was that a lot of comic shops these days, they're trying to get out of the comics game because it's not making money. So
Right.
they hedge their bets with the big two, but they're branching out into becoming game stores. Like they are catering to the D&D crowd, the Magic the Gathering crowd, the Warhammer 40K crowd.
Or sports cards, or all that stuff. So yeah, you see people, but essentially what I'm arguing is that the reason comic book stores are failing is because what they're basically doing is they're competing with Amazon. They're not recommending a book. They're just sitting there saying, "I have a warehouse of comics if you would like to peruse." And wouldn't you rather peruse on the internet where you're seeing what the customer ratings are, and where you can kind of compare different offerings, and you can like throw one in your cart or come back to it later? Amazon's offering a better experience if we're looking at what a comic warehouse would be, right?
Mm-hmm. I suppose. I mean, like, say what you will about Amazon, but I mean, like, they do like have a solid business model.
They do. So the way to beat Amazon is to understand what you can offer that Amazon can't. You can offer a personal involvement. You can offer kind of a guru. You can be the local comics guy who's, got his nose in the book, and he's like, "Oh, you're here. Let me tell you about a great story." And you start telling them things because they're always going to know about Batman and Spider-Man because they've seen that in movies. But you tell them, no. What about Rags? What about White Lily? What about, these other stories? And you give them the emotional hook, and then you sell them stuff, and, you're selling them a print and a comic book and whatnot, and you're making a fine income off that. Not to mention, you are now, by my desk specializing in my products and alternate comics, they can't go to the local comic book store and get these.
Mm-hmm.
So the way you're beating Amazon is by adding a personal touch that you get recognized for your expertise in story and in comic storytelling, and you kind of weave this spell that interests people in what you have to sell. That's your unique selling proposition. It's highly profitable, and in my opinion, it's the future. The future is not just to sit there behind a counter and just point to your warehouse of comics.
Yeah, I mean honestly that is that's a much better future, just because like there's that personal touch to it, and like you're interacting with an actual person, and you just like that could be a real game changer. I mean, if you adapt Amazon's model and but make it more personal.
Right. Well, I mean, you have to look at the landscape and see how it's changing. All right, so one of the things you have to see is that bookstores have largely gone out of business, as a lot of comic book stores have gone out of business. So yeah, it's a tough business, but that also represents an opening, because now there's fewer places that are offering the bookstore experience, essentially. But in part, the reason why bookstores failed and the reason why comic stores are failing is because they both had a warehouse model. When you walked into Barnes & Noble, it wasn't like, have you read the latest whatever? It would tend, they would tend to have some signage over there if you wanted Harry Potter and whatnot. But the people there weren't passionate about selling. They were just like, what can I help you with? And that is not what modern retail should be dedicated to. Modern retail needs to be, here's what we have going on. You're going to love it.
Yeah, Barnes & Noble it's essentially Walmart for books.
Exactly. And you can't compete with Amazon on price and inventory. If that's your business model, you're going to fail. And that's why comic stores are failing. That's why bookstores are failing, is because at the end of the day, they're competing with Amazon on price and inventory. And you're always going to lose.
Yeah. Yeah, because Amazon has more money and more resources to draw from.
Yeah, they have more money, they have more resources, they've got the economies of scale. And when you've got the internet and multiple fulfillment centers, you're not going to be able to compete with them on inventory or logistics or anything like that. What you compete with them on is the human touch. The idea that, me, hey, Preston's a Texan. I like his attitudes about violence and masculinity or whatnot. So when he's recommending a story, I know it's going to be representative or not represent, or whatever of my value. And so you kind of develop these more personal relationships and these more personal communities. And you can imagine someone in Portland, kind of getting his little own social justice group together to read Border Town or whatnot. And, that's totally fine. People kind of seeking a community which shared their values to come together. Because in the internet age, that's the one thing we're not doing, is we're not coming together as a group and, sharing in some experience. Even the cinema, which is us coming together as a group, is still very individual. We're there in our little seat. We're not talking about anything. So comic books offers us an opportunity to come together as a community and to talk about story cheaply.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's that's essentially what Matt and I are trying to do with our publisher Wicked Publishing. It's kind of become my full-time job that I'm basically building up a community around my comic Changeling, and
right.
And it's no different for Matt or Tank with what they're doing.
Right. So, and the nice thing about having these small little one or two people distributors, and by the way, just so we can understand the money I'm talking about, I'm just going to use my Texas example but renting a table for $60, if I'm just selling my stuff, White Lily Comics and then Guinevere and the Divinity Factory plus my prints, people love the artwork on my prints. When you look at, you're going to see I paid top dollar for some very good artists. And so I can easily make, $500, $1,000 in sales on a week just on that $60 table. And can you imagine if I'm kind of diversifying my product out with, say, maybe something you guys offer me? I'm going to be able to basically have that be my full-time job if I want it, as well as maybe hire somebody else, a friend of mine, that, hey, come along and work. So you've already got, where you're getting paid from it. And so now it becomes like when I'm talking to you, I'm not going to ask you what, I'm not going to ask Rags to compete with Spider-Man or Batman, because I'm not even carrying Spider-Man or Batman. I'm going to ask you to tell me how I can sell your story or your comic book to someone who knows nothing about comics. So that's what I'm doing. And if you give me a story that's compelling and artwork that's great at a price point that they're going to want to buy it, okay, let's do it. It's simple.
Sounds like if you really want to make the real money, you got to go outside the Comic-Con scene. And then,
yes. And
that nobody picked up on that.
Right. Well, and then that's one of the things that I found interesting is I noticed, because I do a lot of comic shows, in terms of profitability, I was always way better at the small shows. My worst show consistently is Los Angeles Comic-Con with 90,000 people attending.
It's usually.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, it's usually the big name cons that have a major emphasis on entertainment media, rather than comics that you're not going to do very well at.
You're not. No. And therein is kind of an interesting lesson that we need to learn. If we take my experience, which is if I'm at a toy show, you know, I sold $120 worth of stuff in the first 2 hours, and I was one of the only guys there who had comics. I was certainly the only guy there talking about comics. You know, other people had Transformers and a box of old comics they picked up from someone you could look through if you wanted to. I'm the only guy there talking about comics. But when I'm at LA Comic-Con, I'm one of an entire sea of people talking about comic books. And really, what do I have to offer that Marvel and DC don't? So that's why at these big 90,000 attendee shows, I made, you know, maybe like $100 in sales over the course of the weekend, which is horrible. Whereas, you know, if I'm at a toy show, I'm making that in like an hour or two. And it's because we become the big fish in the small pond, as opposed to the small fish in the massive pond where no one really cares.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, I mean, it just makes, I mean, for one, that just kind of makes sense. I mean, if you go to like the big cons, like the big con out in Washington is Emerald City Comic Con, and you can imagine that it is that thing is geared mainly towards like towards entertainment, and if comics are even talked about, it's mainly the big two.
Right.
Where like a Jet City Comic Show out in Tacoma, which is a much smaller con.
Right.
Something that's a little bit more. It's a little bit more friendly to the little guy.
Yeah. So that's the smaller shows are where, you know, as a small publisher, you need to be doing small shows, in my opinion. I mean, I will still do big shows if they happen to be local to me, but I know I'm not going to make money. I'm mainly there for my daughter, who loves, you know, going and, you know, like talking to the big famous people, and I'll just be there behind my table, just be like, yeah, I'm over here. So.
Yeah, I mean, like this is, dude, we gotta put you in touch with Wicked Publishing. We could use a guy like you. We just
I'm here. I've never heard of Wicked, but I'm always out to meet new people, particularly people that can make me money. I mean, that's me. I'm a capitalist.
They're a publisher. It's very new. It's based out in California. They are publishing my work. They're publishing Matt's. They're also publishing our friend Cody Fernandez's book, Jack Irons, The Steel Cowboy. You should totally check that out, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah,
You know, I just remembered from my experience at selling at Marcy Comic-Con, I was placed in probably the worst place you could be at in Araceli. Across from the 25-cent Golden Age comics booth.
And why was that bad?
Because everyone in their area seemed to be doing a lot worse than the ones that were further away.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're competing with 25-cent DC, 25-cent Marvel comics rather than fellow indies.
Exactly. So, I've already said my piece on big comic shows. So I'm glad that, you know, some of you have experiences that validate that.
Oh yeah.
I can only imagine what the con scene is out like in South Africa.
We only had the first ever Comic-Con this year. The rest of the conventions we have are mixed entertainment. You have a bit of comics, you have a bit of cosplay, you have a bit of tabletop gaming. The big one we have every year is Rage, Really Awesome Gaming Expo. Yes, derivative name. Boring. But the main emphasis there is video games. It is the cut price South African version of E3. So what you have every year is you have all the local retailers, you have hardware distributors there. Everybody's in there trying to get your attention, sell your products, reviews and all those things. But if you pay attention to the internet, you know most of these things already. So pretty much you're only going there for the deals and trying to pick up, play the demos or whatever they have on display or running there from the distributors that we have here. So the big one being Megarom Entertainment, and they go from there. As for comic stores, pretty much the same thing that is happening. comic stores here are already diverse in what they're selling. They sell video games, they sell tabletop games, trading cards, comics,
and by the way,
obviously manga. So they sell everything just in order to stay in business.
I wanna kind of jump on your point there. That is, yes, you're seeing comic book stores diversify away from comics. So you can imagine if they weren't passionate about selling comics when that was their only business, how passionate are they going to be about selling comics when it's not even their main business anymore, or it's a side business?
It's going to take the complete sidestep. I'm just thinking of the one we have here in one of the towns close to us.
Right.
They are very, very apathetic to selling you anything. You walk in there, and it's like, you don't feel welcome in the store.
No. So what I'm proposing is it's about a transfer of enthusiasm. All right. You're passionate about comics because you're involved in the making of them, or people who are involved in the making of it. So when I'm there presenting rags, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I talked to the guy who made it. Here's what he's going. You're able to put a personal touch on it. You're enthusiastic about it. You make them enthusiastic about it. Meanwhile, your competitors, the biggest competitors, Marvel and DC, which are going to be crushing you in any kind of big comic environment because they've got the big displays and that's what people are there to see. But in the small shop environment, they don't have an enthusiastic advocate. No one is there like, oh my God, have you read the latest Spider-Man? I haven't met that guy. Have you? At a comic store? Have you seen anyone do that?
Off the top of my head.
No. They should be doing that, but they don't. I guarantee if you go to a car dealership, they're going to be saying, have you driven the latest whatever? But at comic stores, no one's passionate about their product. So just the solution is simple. Carry a small number of comics that you are passionate about, and you sell people on those properties. That's all you got to do.
I've had more enthusiasm from a guy at one of the local electronics stores trying to sell me the latest Blu-ray player than I've had from that one time I went into the comic store.
Right. So the problem with the comics environment is apathy. The guys who are writing it, as we know from following all the YouTube critics, the people who are writing it aren't really passionate about making comics, and the people who are selling it aren't particularly passionate about selling comics. The solution is simple. You just get passionate about what you're doing.
Yeah. There's an account on Twitter I follow called Rainbow Squid Ink, and I was in a thread where she was going on a rant on Wreck-It Ralph too. She's a huge fan of the original movie, and she hated the sequel with a passion. And she had this take that was just kind of seared into my head. Mm-hmm. And it was about the people who made this, and like people have sort of become the gatekeepers of entertainment, so to speak.
Right.
They don't play video games. They don't read comic books. They don't animate. They're not on the internet. These are people who are not in touch with the audience they're supposed to be selling these products to.
Right. So to me, if we take a step back and we just make ourselves an uninterested observer of the world for a little bit, in 10, 15 years, what do we think the future of Marvel and DC, the comic book and publishing businesses, are going to be?
Well, with Marvel, they're already starting to farm their books out to smaller like IDW.
Yes.
Like Marvel and DC, like they don't even exist to sell comics. They exist to license their IPs.
Yes. So most likely, if we're assigning a probability in 10 or 15 years' time, Marvel and DC will be IPs that largely get exploited through the production of movies, and they will license and then get a share of related products from comic book sales or merchandising and whatnot, right?
And then from the other side, there's also this drive from Marvel to diversify themselves as a lifestyle brand.
Right.
Whatever that is going to take a shape of.
And so
it involves making a giant burrito and making really cringy videos where they run to a con.
Right. So it doesn't take a lot of foresight to look into the future and say, where is this headed? And once you look at that landscape, you got to go, okay, how can I make money if this is my future? And it's easy. The major, the dominant industry giants of the industry we're in, comic books, are largely slowly going out of business. as is Diamond Distribution, as is your local comic book store. The entire model is failing. But here's a model that's sustainable, that's easy to do, that can entirely sidesteps them, and quite frankly, makes you the hot intellectual product of the future.
Yeah, I mean, like that. Yeah, I guess that's just like, I mean, people have been talking like about how, I mean, depending on who you're watching on YouTube, like, I'm not going to name names.
Sure.
But let's just say there's a few particular channels who have kind of become quote unquote voices of authority on the industry, and they seem to bemoan the idea that the industry is dying. They're not correct.
Mm-hmm.
It's not dying, it's changing. But the problem is, like with all changes, those who can't adapt, they get left behind.
Yes. So
yeah. So when we're seeing a lot of comic book stores go out of business, it's not because the industry is dying. It's because the industry is changing, and these stores did not adapt with it.
Right.
And so really, it's kind of the same with everything. I mean, like, it's adapt or die.
Yes, it's adapt or die. And in the future, what we're going to be seeing is people who are doing more of a personalized human touch in terms of retail sales. You know, when I'm going to, electronics or my cell phone, like, all right, maybe I already have an idea of whether I want an iPhone or an Android, but for the most part, I'm looking to the guy at the electronics store to go, look, I need a Bluetooth headset. Which one is good and how will it work? And I'm expecting the guy to go, here's the one you need. It's right here. This is how you hook it up. I'm relying on them for expertise. And comics and stories are going to be the same way. So, I would love to share some of the artwork for Guinevere the Divinity Factory with you guys. I don't know how to do that over.
You can screen share, Preston, like just on the left side, you'll see a green button. That's your screen share option.
Okay. All right. Let me make sure I've downloaded the artwork here, because this is not my regular computer. I'm in Los Angeles today. I'll download this folder and I'll share some. I'll share with you some of the artwork. I think you guys are gonna love it.
All right, that sounds cool. All right, but yeah, I mean, like, I think there is something there that
I'm listening.
I was gonna say there is something there that we are looking at the industry. We are seeing the industry change, and we really got to see people pick up on that more and try to adapt to it. And I do think, like, where distribution is concerned, we're probably going to, as a good alternative to the Diamond model, is we have these smaller distributors who are more local, more regional, who are able. They're not going to take all the books, but they will take just a handful that they are really interested in and that they can sell to other people. And that, and as you said, that adds a personal touch that adds a human element, as opposed to this giant monolith and very impersonal corporate feel that you get out of Amazon and Diamond. It's just
exactly. Well, good. I'm glad we're all in agreement.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of. I'm trying to. I don't want to bring up a Walmart comparison, but it's about the only one that really makes sense. It's like the difference between going to Walmart and your local grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, the only reason why it's brought up so often is because it's true.
Yeah, it is. I mean, like, and honestly, about the only reason I go to Walmart is just because it's closer to me, and it's a little cheaper.
Well, yeah, I think that's for the most part the big reason why people will go. It's for the pricing. Same reason why they go for Amazon.
It's not just the pricing; it's also the convenience.
Yep.
Convenience, because it's a lot, and also, I mean, like the big grocery chain that competes with Walmart out in the Pacific Northwest is Winco. Their prices are a little better, but they don't have the selection that Walmart has. But I mean, like, if you were just going to go strictly grocery shopping, you would want to go with Winco.
Yeah. Although it's thinking about now, here in Michigan, there's 2 companies that are competing with Walmart, Kroger and Meijer. And I found that those 2 places have more of a stock than Walmart.
All right, let's see. So I'm going to try coming over here and go to
If you just hover over the window, you should see a green button on the
screen share. Is that it?
That's it. Green button. That's your screen share option, dude.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to share my entire screen. How about that? Is that working?
It will center it on you. So, see? All right. All right. That is some very cool artwork.
Thank you. So this is a 2-page spread. Oh, I didn't mean to zoom in on it. Oh. Hopefully my computer's kind of old. Hopefully it's not going to melt down. So there's a 2-page spread from the comic book. This is I love this page. So this is the I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I'm actually going in reverse order. All right, so this is the cover right here. This is the main cover of our story. This is
cover. Yeah, it is a gorgeous cover. I mean, like, yeah, like our friend, yeah, our if you don't mind me asking, Preston, I mean, like because one thing I've seen leveled at a criticism I've seen leveled at a lot of indie books is that they seem to pour all their money into the cover.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas the interior image is kind of like an afterthought,
mm-hmm.
Can we assume that you have the same people working on the cover and the interior art?
Yes, with the exception of the variant cover. The variant cover, which is right here. This is our variant. So this is main cover here, variant cover here, and people have been really responding to this. At comic shows, I offer these as prints. And people love this variant cover. I think because maybe it looks like some other comic book figure, but this has a different penciler. The inker and colorist are the same throughout the rest of the book, but we brought in a variant penciler here named Pablo, who works for DC. He does a lot of big profile covers, and we met him at a party, and he offered to do a special for us. So here's Pablo's work on this variant cover. But other than that, I use the exact same artistic team on every page of this book. So that's why the cover looks, here's an interior page. I love this one with the cocked Dutch angle here.
Oh, yeah. I guess coming from your background as a screenwriter, it has a very cinematic feel, right?
Exactly. So here they are in the spirit realm. And again, I explained previously why she looks so marked up is because they're in the spirit realm. And this is her idealized self, which here, I will find you the page where she's astrally projecting. I love that one. Colors in Dropbox. So we're going to go to page 8. All right, so here we are at the party. She's kind of met our great wizard Gatsby, if you will, although at this point he's just a generic figure. And I know a guy who's a high-profile gambler. You can imagine as a poker player, how would I know people like that? But he would invite me to these parties at the top of the Rio, because he was, he dropped so much change that, he got to hang out there. And the presidential suite at the very top of the Rio opens into the nightclub, the Voodoo Lounge. And so you can imagine, like, if you're there hanging out at the bar, you're able to pick up chicks by going like, hey, have you ever seen the presidential suite? It's through that door that only I can go through. And so, I figured Gatsby, or in this case, my Gatsby-like figure, would have this, his opening to his mage area, his private sanctum, would be a direct door that he could access right off the party. So he's kind of there. He's inviting her right off the party. There's a couple over here getting frisky, but he's like, oh, you want to talk magic? Come back to my inner sanctum, which we can see is warded. Not even this ghost can get in. So that's what's happening here on page 8. And then on page 9, as I previously described, he is a big fan of the Doors, right?
Yeah.
So here's all of his Doors memorabilia.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, the gold records. There's Jim Morrison, electric guitars. And, she is like, wow, this is a crazy sanctum. By the way, there's a freestanding bathtub here, which I never explained. I want to guess why there's a bathtub there.
Bathtub. Why would there be a... Guys, can you think of a reason why there would be a bathtub?
It's on the tip.
Pardon? I didn't hear.
Can't. Yeah, just can't think of the name. Reason.
Oh, all right. So Jim Morrison died rather young from a drug overdose, and
that's the tub he died in.
That's the tub he died in. Exactly. Because if you're a wizard, you could find that, right? You'd be like, huh, he died in the bed. So he found the exact tub that Jim Morrison died in, and there it is in his private wizard sanctum. So he's there, and he's putting some magic herbs in her champagne, and he's saying, I'm going to take you on a journey into the spirit realm. You've never done it before, but here we go. And so, she's adopting the lotus position here as he's playing Break On Through on the keyboards. And then on page 10, this is where she is astrally projecting. So boom. And so now this is where her true spirit self emerges, which is, kind of a younger, battered version of herself. And, he appears and here's where he's explaining that it's because this is her internal self-image. She sees herself as this victimized woman. And that is, she must transcend. And that's kind of what he's explaining to her. Mm-hmm. This is another great Gatsby reference, by the way, because I don't know if you guys are familiar with the novel, but as part of the story, there's this big party going on, and there's a guy in a library just reading a book.
I think I might have forgotten about that, but then again, like the last thing I remember I perused that was Gatsby related was the film version with, I think it was Robert Redford.
Right, exactly. So. In the novel, there's a guy reading a book, so we've got that there, and then he takes her outside so they're astrally floating, and now they're looking down on the party from above as kind of spirit forms. So this is an interior splash page here, page 12.
I'm just gonna throw this out there. That artwork is amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, like you've got some top shelf talent from us. Like I'm gonna assume like these are not just some. You didn't just grab anyone. These are people who worked in the industry for some time.
Yes, and that's one of the other quirky things about the comic book industry, particularly the way Marvel and DC have gone, is that they have gone on cost cutting. So they don't pay their artists top dollar anymore. They're like, look, if you're going to draw Spider-Man or Batman, then you should be happy that you're drawing Spider-Man or Batman and stop asking about money, right? So that creates an opportunity for someone who is willing to pay, top dollar for good talent to put out a book like this as an indie.
Which is pretty sad considering the iconic, how iconic Batman and Spider-Man are to a culture.
I know it is really sad, but again, like I don't dictate the economy. I just know if you want to put out a top-rate comic book that people can sit down and compare to the industry giants and be like, wow, this book looks awesome. It's not that hard. All it takes is a bit of money.
Yeah, no, like I know what you mean. Like I think I remember Diversity Comics talking about like he was going through the new Wolverine comic and it was illustrated by Steve McNiven, and he said like there's a reason why you don't see artwork like this on a more regular basis these days, and that's because guys like Steve McNiven are too expensive for Marvel.
Right. Exactly.
So they save them for like the special events, and otherwise they just farm them. They just hand the artwork off to like pretty much anyone they can find for like $100 a page.
Yes. And as you can tell from my page rate, $100 a page rate doesn't pay anybody. Neither my inker, my penciler, or my colorist are working for that rate. So, but then, so she was given this amulet as part of. So here they are, kind of in the spirit realm, and then he gives her this amulet, which she's wearing as she leaves, and we see that it has some magical abilities, and the amulet allows her to peek into the spirit realm. And this is an ability she can't quite control yet because she's an apprentice wizard. And so now here she is walking along the streets of New York City, and this is her, her earlier victimized spirit self that she's seeing running down the street, along with, being chased by her abusive ex-boyfriend. And she's like, oh my God, who else can see this? And the thing is, she's getting a glimpse into the world that no one else can see because of this special amulet she's wearing. And so this is a construction site, but now we get a glimpse into the spirit realm, and we see a succubus and demons, and there's this very oppressive spirituality to the city of Manhattan that she's seeing for the first time.
Yeah.
And then this leads us to our last page, which is, oh my God, and so that is the New York Criminal Court, which is in a very iconic building, but we see that it's become corrupted. And so that's basically issue 1 of our story.
Symbolism. That's... I can... Oh, yeah.
I'm intrigued. Now that I've seen more, I'm very intrigued.
Cool. Anyway.
But I backed it.
Yeah, we're gonna have to put some. We're gonna have to. I might have to put money down on this one. That's after my next paycheck, but that's after I put some money towards my guys. As for my book, I mean, like,
fantastic. Do you guys want to see the pitch video? It is all of 80 seconds.
Sure.
All right.
Sure, why not? Let's do it. Sure, why not? Let's do it.
All right.
Be able to play it. Guys at home, tell us if this comes through all right.
All right, if we're ready, I'm going to hit play. Here we go.
I'm writer and creator Preston Poulter, the one who brought you White Lily, the story that two deadliest.
Can't really hear anything, but I can see stuff that looks cool at least.
By the reaction I get from fans.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to. I'm assuming the pitch video's on the Kickstarter, right? Right, Preston?
Is it going okay so far?
Yeah, it's actually a bit muted on our end, and the chat seems to agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess the pitch video did not work, but that is something you can look at on either Kickstarter or Indiegogo. Like I said, I made a music video, so there is, there's Julie. Oh, do you guys want to see? If you want, I can show you what Julie actually looks like.
Sure, fine. But yeah, just so you know, though, I have included links to both your Twitter and the Kickstarter in the description of this, so
Thank you.
people should find it.
Where is the picture of Julie that I tend to share?
Here's something I gotta ask you, Preston. And this was something that Ryan has brought up about in regards to Rags. Like he's told up and down that Rags never would have worked had he not been able to get Liz to sign on to it. Could you say that Guinevere and the Divinity Factory would work if you didn't have Julie?
It absolutely would work. Yes.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great story with a great artistic team. Now, if you don't agree, feel free to say I'm not hot on your story, or you don't like, I get criticism all the time. I encourage it. That's fine. But but here's the thing. So it doesn't hurt that. All right, I'm going to bring up Google Hangouts again, wherever I can find that. It doesn't hurt that I have someone on my project. Oh, here we go. I'm going to go share screen again.
Well, I think the reason why Brian says it wouldn't have worked without Liz is just because so much of Regina's character is inspired by Liz.
But
so
this is,
I can see, and she is a very attractive woman.
Right. So it doesn't hurt that you have a very attractive woman at the core of your story. So, that's the other thing that I think comics get criticized for a lot is that we are drawing women in a very unrealistic way. And so I thought, no, I want the comic character to look like Julie, to look like a real woman. So there she is. She's a real woman. I met her at a comic convention, and I'm like, you know what? You're gorgeous. I want to send her a comic around you. So,
yeah.
Anyway. But I mean, would my story work without it? Yeah. Would it work as well? Probably not.
Like I said, I think the difference is because Guinevere is only based off Julie in appearance. I'm assuming the two are different women completely.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why Brian says it wouldn't work. Rags wouldn't work without Liz because like I said, so much of what goes into Regina's character is based off Liz's personality.
Okay.
So
Well,
I can see where he's coming from and why she's basically his Uma Thurman.
Okay, sure. I mean, yeah, that's when I was shooting the music video. There's a scene I just show you in the comic book artwork, but when I was writing the story, I'm like, you know what, we've never seen in kind of these Gatsby parties or in the Gatsby movies, we've never seen a dungeon. But I'm like, it's set modern day, and there's no reason to think that people wouldn't be getting freaky. So I actually have a couple of like dungeon scenes. So when we're going for the music video, like the day before, I'm like, we need a dominatrix. And so I put that out into the ethers. And one of the great things about Los Angeles is there are so many people who are looking to get in front of a camera. You can just send out an email if I need a dominatrix. And the next day, a woman named Athena Massey, who is an actress, shows up, and she's got all kinds of stuff in bags, and she's just like, what outfit do you want me in? What do you want me carrying? And I was able to just mix and match and go this, and this. But and she looked great in the video. But we went out to dinner afterwards, and she was telling me that she's had a comic character based on her that she attended the launch of. Unfortunately, the comic didn't pan out, as so many indie comics will not do. But I understand the idea of taking a local person and just personifying them in making them the whole center of your comic book. But yes, in that case, you have a story that obviously is centered around that person and is inseparable from them.
Yeah, it's turned out for the best because Regina's become quite the indie darling.
Right. Well, I mean, it makes sense in that we have actresses who are looking for, fame.
Liz is not an actress. She's a streamer on Twitch.
Okay.
And I think she has a day job in marketing. Like it's just, but yeah, she's not. But yeah, that's not what she is. That's not what she does. It's just more like she has a. If you follow her Twitter, and then you start kind of reading rags, like you start to pick up on why Brian chose her,
right,
to work with her, and it's just and I'm not kidding when I said like he pitched this to Liz over Instagram and she just signed on the spot.
Right. Well, then she's clearly someone who's looking for exposure.
I think in his possibly, but I think it's also she was actually intrigued by the book.
Okay.
Yeah, didn't she think that she was going to be a side character, like a zombie?
Yeah, she did. Yeah, she was very taken aback when he told her she was going to be the main character.
Well, one of the things that, as someone who's also a movie maker, that I like is that making the music video. I think when you guys go and watch the video, it made the story even more compelling. I guess it made my Kickstarter kind of presentation even more compelling. And I'm already on pace to do 5 figures, and that's by far better than my last White Lily Kickstarter. And so it got me thinking of making a short video, which if you're in filmmaker talk, a lot of amateur people will be trying to put together a video short, right? I don't know if you know much about movie making, but people are like, well, I can't make a 90-minute feature, but maybe I can make a 10-minute feature. And so you try and get your friends together for a 10-minute feature kind of thing. And they're called video shorts, and you present them at film festivals and whatnot as a way to exhibit your movie making prowess.
Yeah, I think I know what you're getting at. Like a lot of people, it's a lot easier to make like a short film.
Right.
Another mutual friend of ours, we know him as Slick Jimmy. He's the creator of a comic called Little Girl Lethal.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually talked about how hard it is to just get a film off the ground. He's had some experience doing it, and that's working in the independent side of the industry.
Yes. It's hard to get a movie off the ground. And here's the thing about a video short. Let's say you make it, and let's say it's awesome. You make an awesome video short. What are you going to sell that for?
Yeah.
The answer is 0. No one's going to buy it. Now, they
Most-
might be interested in a project related to it. They might be like, oh, this is cool. I want to make a movie with you around this idea. But your video short in and of itself has no marketability, typically.
Yeah, it does.
Pretty much.
I
So-
think like,
Go ahead.
and like there was like a horror film that it was a ghost movie.
Right.
It spun out of a short film
Mhm.
that some people that I've heard a couple critics say was that the short film was actually superior to the film version, but those are very much the exceptions.
Right. And the reason people are making video shorts, they know that they're going to lose money on the video short, but they're hoping that someone's going to go, oh, I love it. Let's make a movie out of it. And then, they're going to be in business.
At that point, that's working for exposure.
Exactly. So you're working
Yep.
for exposure. But here, if you couple it with a comic book offering, which I'm doing for Guinevere and the Divinity Factory, where, if you back it at, $28, you get the comic, the variant cover, and the music video download. If that reflects in a higher take in terms of, people are more responsive, you're now finding a way to monetize a video short, which means you should be working with an actress or actors. And, I'm starting to think, okay, the next issue of White Lily in number 3, she actually gets shot down over Stalingrad, which happened, by the way. Historical figure got shot down about 3 or 4 times. And so I know in Texas, there's like a guy who has an armory where he has like some tanks and some fighter planes and stuff. And I'm like, what if I did a video short kind of on that guy's land where I take a couple of people, and I invest $5,000 or $10,000 in producing a video short, which I can now take to a film festival and pitch my movie idea, but I can also package it with White Lily issue 3. So, you start to bundle together your IP offerings, and it makes everything more compelling. It's a better consumer experience. And it also puts you in touch with other people that, the actresses, or in this case, Julie playing Guinevere, who now want to go out and be your advocate. So I think it's a win-win for everybody.
And I guess it's just
Definitely.
a difference when you're working with film, just because let's just say working with artists, they don't want to work for exposure because
Right.
most of them have this is their livelihood. They got to eat.
Exactly. And that's where, I'm the reason why my comic book looks so good. When you look at the music video, the reason why, oh my God, you got this attractive, gorgeous woman to play dominatrix and Julie, it's because I'm writing checks at the end of it. None of these people worked for exposure, so I'm sitting here, I bankroll the whole project, and then I bring it to you in terms of Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and I hope you like it. And so far you have. And I know I'm in a position other people aren't in, but I am saying that the amount of money I'm talking about in order to put these projects together is not astronomical. It's not like making a feature film, which now we're talking about, okay, you need $250,000.
And that's and that's like for what? Just your average independent film?
Yeah, I mean, so like shooting that music video, all right, which was, a one-day shoot. So we rented a location. We found a bar called the Federal, which had a nice speakeasy feel to it. So renting that bar was $1,000. But now we had to go, okay, how much was the cinematographer? And when we're talking about the cinematographer, they're not only bringing themselves and their expertise, they're also bringing their camera and their gear and an assistant. And so you're paying for all that. It's like, paying for an exterminator or whatnot. They're bringing both their expertise and their gear. And
yeah, you shot this out in LA, right?
Yep.
And I'm gonna have to assume you had to deal with the unions.
No, this was a non-union shoot.
Oh.
But that offers certain eligibility and stuff. But I'm still saying that I was able to find and hire a cinematographer pretty cheap. But like going day rates for a cinematographer is like $2,000 to $3,000, depending on the camera they're bringing to bear and whether they're bringing also, like jibs and cranes and stuff to get certain shots. So you can imagine, okay, if I'm going to make a movie, and that's a movie's going to take say 20 to 25 days to shoot, and just to pay for a location, $1,000, and a cinematographer at $2,000, that'll be $3,000 just for those two pieces, and I've already spent about $75,000, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, Preston, just for some perspective, what's all that like on the low end of the spectrum?
Well, on the low end of the spectrum, what if we weren't using it with a cinematographer? What if we were shooting it with our iPhone? Well, now we just saved a bunch of money, right?
But the cost is you go majorly down in production value.
Correct. So, and that's something you can't escape. If you're spending less, your production value is going to be less. It just is.
Yeah, and yeah, that is true. I mean, like that is true. I mean, you know, I'm not going to ask you how much you had to spend to make this, but I'm going to assume it was not a pretty penny.
Yeah, I mean, it was about the amount of money that the music video cost was about how much it took to produce a comic book with that level of artistic talent. So, and that was for a 1-day shoot. You can imagine it's somewhere in like the $10,000 range. So when we look at Kickstarter, essentially Guinevere and the Divinity Factory issue 1 with the music video is about $20,000 of my own money you're looking at.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to throw this out. Taken across exchange rates, that's a shitload of money.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Let's just say the dollar, a U.S. dollar, goes a long way out in South Africa.
Sure. And well, I mean, in South Africa, you're probably going to be, paying less for a rental shoot. You're probably, the costs go down greatly, I'm going to assume, of, producing a video. Not to mention.
Yeah, but that's. The funny thing is, nobody this side is actually looking at doing these things. It's only some of us a lot of us that I've met on Twitter as well that are actually looking at this. I was originally looking at doing a comic, but costs involved are a little bit astronomical. That's why I shifted away to just writing a novella series instead.
Sure, and that's understandable. And I mean, I've got money, so I can afford. I can afford to play in this arena. But as the business model becomes more proven, as we're like, oh, wow, people who have great comic book / short video offerings on Kickstarter and Indiegogo are able to make money, you're going to start having people be willing to defer their expenses. Be really like, look, if you can shoot the thing now and understand you're going to get a payday when this thing funds, then, you're going to able to put out a high production value without a cash flow issue, which is what Blumhouse does.
Oh, that's true.
Are you familiar with Blumhouse's pictures? He was the guy that did Paranormal Activity.
I'm aware of that film, yes.
Yeah. So Blumhouse is able to get high-level talent, like major name actors, to work in his little small indie movies. And the way he's able to do that is he's convinced them that he's not going to screw them when it comes to the accounting, and so they're working for back end, points and percentages.
Oh, yeah, I'm looking it up. He's worked with directors like James Wan, Mike Flanagan, James DeMonico, M. Night Shyamalan, and Scott Derrickson. Right.
Exactly. And so you can imagine if you're Blumhouse, your thing is, hey, you're a major name. How much did you get for your last picture? And they're going to be like, oh, I got, a few million. Okay, great. Do you know how well Paranormal Activity did? Can you imagine having a percentage of that? Why don't you and I do a project together and you basically, defer your fees and instead work for a big back end? So if you make that same offer to people, some of them might say yes. And now you have a way to defer your expenses until after you got the money in, ideally.
I'm also looking at some of the films they made. Like, a lot of them are low-budget horrors, but they also did Whiplash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which was a great movie. I love that one. So.
Yeah, Whiplash and Get Out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely those two are definitely feathers in their cap. That gives. I mean, hey, we produced this film that earned a nomination for Best Picture. That's something you can leverage.
Yes, absolutely. So, and that is kind of what I'm viewing as a sustainable. I don't want to call it the future, because that would imply that everyone's going to be doing this in the future. But it's certainly a valid business model that people are doing right now. And that's, you have an idea, an intellectual property you want to explore in comic book or film or whatnot, and you get grade A talent to work on your projects for deferred costs because they understand the business model and they trust you.
Mm-hmm.
Although, having said that, everybody involved in my project has, for the most part, already gotten paid. So, but you know, that's just because I had the money to do it.
All right, so I mean, let's see. Do you guys have anything else you want to add?
Nope.
All right, cool. Well, it was great talking to you guys.
All right, thanks for having you on, Preston.
You.
And like we hope that Guinevere and the Divinity Factory it meets its goal. You guys, you can follow Preston on Twitter at ComicsJax. You can follow his Kickstarter. Or for Guinevere and the Divinity Factory, we have links to both in the description.
No, my connection's actually being a potato right now. So
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I think Matt said his connection is being a baked potato right now.
Ah, I understand.
But yeah, guys. All the links are in the description, guys. Definitely give Preston a follow on Twitter, and if you can, just throw him some cash. And if Preston, if this thing is successful, we got to have you back on for a fall.
Okay, great. I look forward to it. I mean,
right,
right now we have 57 backers, and it's only been up for a day. So we've already met.
What's your goal that you're hoping to make?
$5,000, and we've already brought in 1,600. So this
you've already fit the way there. That is good.
Yeah.
All right. So we will definitely keep an eye on that. All right. So I will kill the feed right now.